Hamilton Naturalists Club's monthly bird study group meeting. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Hudecki, and I am the bird study group director for the HNC. Very happy that you're here or that you're tuning in from wherever you are in the world, whatever date you're happening to catch this on. We're hopefully recording this talk tonight so we can share it at a later date. I keep promising that. Fingers crossed that we can make it work one of these times. This is the second last meeting that we're having before we take a break, a bit of a summer hiatus, which is an annual thing. So I'll get right down to it. So we, of course, always like to talk in my history of the First Nations and Métis people of the province, and pay respects to the 6 nations of the Grand River Territory and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Speaking to you today from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat nations. And our Hamilton study area, our 40-kilometer radius that you may or may not hear about, depending on if you are new to the club or not. The HNC Hamilton study area is a 40-kilometer radius with Dundurn Castle kind of being the center point. So everything you see that falls within that blue circle there is what's in the Hamilton study area. That includes all of those traditional lands. If you are new to the Hamilton Naturalists Club, we host, in fact, we hold 2 meetings once a month. There's a general meeting that occurs a week before this one. And so last week you may have attended one all about frogs. And so there's the one last week is a general meeting, and we have a variety of speakers, but the bird study group meetings, we only talk about birds and anything related to it. And so our goal is trying to just unite everybody, is trying to unite birders of every level. We specifically like to focus on, some broader topics or some specific topics. Every month has been something different this year, which has been great. And we've had people from kind of all over the province, which is awesome. Someone from Ottawa, someone from up in Whitby, and then several from right here in Hamilton, which is great. But we want to kind of amplify the voices of people making a difference in the birding world and in the natural world. We want to try and bring the average person, the beginner, intermediate birder, and the expert birder to the same place. I don't know where you would classify yourselves on a list of birder in the area, but happy to have you here no matter what. Now, we've had some interesting birding activity, some birdie activity in the HSA in the last month since we last met. So migration is in full swing now. I guess the big rarity, it was the American white pelican that stayed for, I guess it was about 3 days. I guess Saturday was the last day it was seen. This photo was taken by Joseph Miner. He said he was standing at the south point of Churchill Park in Westdale when he took this photograph. So I asked for a photo on our Discord channel yesterday, and I got one sent from another friend of mine. It was just a bit too far away, but the pelican was here for a couple days. And I was watching it along with my friend Sarah. She was standing on the high level bridge. I was standing in the Arboretum at RBG. We were both kind of watching it, and 2 eagles kind of like escorted it until it just kind of, without even flapping its wings, it just got higher and higher and higher in the sky until the eagles kind of gave up and came back down. And then the pelican just disappeared and hasn't been seen since. So the eagles may have successfully escorted it away. In that moment too, I'm just going to share this with you, is to get a little nerdy with you here for a sec. I was also watching a red-tailed hawk do a display that I've never seen before, and I was so shocked. It was doing this thing where it was flying straight up in the sky, and then it would tuck its wings and do this stooping before popping back up and opening its wings and then tucking its wings, swimming straight up and down in the sky. And I was enthralled. I've never seen that kind of display before. So that was pretty neat. Okay, I'll step off my own bragging soapbox there for a sec. So some warblers are showing up as well, which is always exciting. So pine, yellow rumped, even a palm warbler has shown up in the Hamilton study area. Someone heard a house wren recently, which was cool. Chipping sparrows, on Sunday, I heard a lot of them. I was at the Arboretum at Royal Botanical Gardens, and it was just, there was plenty of them. And so I heard from a few friends that chipping sparrows had are showing up more and more. A northern rough-winged swallow was a second arrival of the swallow crew. Tree swallows have been around for a little bit now. People even reported a common tern as well as Caspians since our last meeting, which is great. Hermit thrush, which is awesome. And then brown thrasher is another one. There's probably a few others that could make the list. But what are you seeing? Let us know in the chat what you've seen lately. What's something that you found exciting as a migrant in this early springtime of 2021. COVID birding, right? We're kind of, this is arguably the scariest time of the pandemic. Case numbers are crazy. They're really high, and we, of course, are being as cautious as possible wherever we go. The Naturalist Club has not hosted any walks. Everything is virtual, as you know. You're here right now. So, but even, the Niagara Peninsula Hawk Watch has canceled even their, and this is like decades worth of research that's been happening there. They're not conducting those surveys, their daily surveys right now. So they're asking that if you're witnessing certain raptors, and I think the big broadwing numbers, black vultures, golden eagles, goshawks, anything that you're seeing with that is quite, put it, or maybe Chris can put it in the chat, the email address for the Niagara Peninsula Hawk Watch. So if you are seeing unusual or high numbers of raptors migrating the next little bit. But stay safe out there. We urge everyone to be as safe and as cautious as possible. Even when you're on the trails, keep a mask on you, wear it around your neck, put it in your pocket. When you're seeing people, put your masks on. Better safe than, of course, sorry. And we want to make sure that everyone is staying as safe as possible wherever they are. And if it means you're birding in your backyard, great. If you're birding out of your window, tonight is going to be a great lesson for you so that we can better hone our own bird listening, our own ears, so that we can be birding from, heck, even I was birding while working the other day, last week. I had my window open and a common raven flew right over downtown Hamilton, right through my backyard or over my house. So you can bird safely from inside. Last month and next month, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the cliff swallow petition that is ongoing. It's not quite at 20,000 signatures yet. The goal is to get to 25,000. So we encourage those, and I've put this in the chat already, to submit, to sign that petition, so that when these and it's not just for cliff swallows. I mean, this particular project is, but we want to ensure that the cliff swallows that have been, particularly at the Argyle Bridge in Caledonia, that habitat is being monitored and protected during this construction period that is upcoming. So please sign the petition. I'll get to a little bit more in a moment. Chris Motherwell, who's the president, who's on this as well, has let us know that the bird count that was originally scheduled, I think, for May 2nd, has been moved until Sunday, May 16th. Partially because of the migrants, also because of the lockdown measures, or the shutdown order. We want to ensure people that this is something that you hopefully are doing, again, as safely as possible if you are taking part in this, not going out in large groups. So contact Chris Motherwell, cmtrain at cmtrain.com. You can see his email address there, or just mention in the chat that you are looking to take part in the spring bird count, which we haven't done in a very long time, right? Most birders are out and about, mostly at Pelee and in other hotspots, catching migration. So now we can get a good glimpse of what's happening here. Last month, we talked about the Biodiversity Action Plan, and I'm happy to say that that City Council has accepted the initial first phase of this plan, which is incredible. So hats off to Environment Hamilton and Jen Baker of the Hamilton Naturalists Club. Our one employee, and I say one, we do have two. I should say that if you go over to our Facebook page, we're currently looking for a second employee. Carolyn Zanchetta, who you know and love, is moving on to a new role elsewhere, and that's left open a 6-month contract. So we're looking for a urban habitat restoration assistant. So if you are somebody looking for work or know somebody who is, go over to our Facebook page, Hamilton Naturalists Club, and you can see that posting and all it entails there. And you can be part of the Hamilton Biodiversity Action Plan, which is super exciting. The GOAT fundraiser is ongoing still, so we're looking to gather some funds in order to kind of help eradicate some invasive species at our Sheila Dunn Dooley Nature Sanctuary. So again, if you visit our website, hamiltonnature.org, or contact Jen Baker, which is land@hamiltonnature.org, you can see more. I'm just opening the chat now to see, because I see it flashing. I wanted to see if I had missed anything. If you are looking to reach everybody, click all panelists and attendees, by the way. I'm just going to let you know that. 10 great egrets today at Princess Point from 995804. Thank you for that. We're not supposed to be out at all, says Daphne Payne. You are right. You are allowed to go out for exercise purposes, health and well-being. So if you are out and about on the trails and you are birding, that's what we are talking about. A killdeer in Churchill Park Rain Gardens. That's great. There was quite a few there last year, I noticed, which was awesome. So thanks for that. I think that's Dave. Owner had a northern flicker in your yard. That's awesome. Chris Motherwell saying for hawk migrant sighting, Sandy Darling. So Darling A at kojico.ca or Keith Deeroff, kdeeroff at yahoo.ca. Thank you for that input, Sarah. The lockdown is until May 20th. So Chris, as the president and organizer of that, will take that into consideration, which is great. Oh, maybe Chris, so Chris just put it to all panelists, so Chris might resend that post. Okay, I'm going to stop looking at the chat for a second. If you are someone looking for more birding resources, there are a plethora of them. So Facebook and Instagram, you can find Hamilton Naturalists Club there. I've started an Instagram page called Beaks and Geeks. You can join me there for just whatever birding things I happen to put on there. Discord is another popular one these days where sightings are shared up to the minute, which is awesome. So you can look up both Hamilton Naturalist Club and Ontario Birds. The Ontario Birds section of Discord is definitely where most of the sightings are being shared. Rob Porter, who is our special guest tonight, has his own podcast, the Songbirding Podcast, which is just tremendous, and I encourage you all to check that out. And then if you are a list server or on Google Groups, you can look up Hamilton Birds, HSA Nature Notes, or Hamilton Beginning Birders for more places to be receiving updates about what birds are being spotted, where, and when. If you are a member, you would have received the Wood Duck, your latest copy of the Wood Duck. And you can see on the Wood Duck, on the front cover, there he is there, one and only Bruce McKenzie, working on his Grimsby wetlands. So this is a great resource and something that we often look for people to contribute to. So if you're a writer or a photographer, we're definitely interested in hearing from you. So become a member of the Naturalist Club and be part of a 102-year-old club. Be a part of history because we'd love to have you. You can always email me at birdstudygroup@hamiltonnature.org. Or again, we have our own kind of subsection of our website, which we're a little slow on the uptick on getting things to, but we're working on it. Our next month's meeting, which is also our last meeting of the springtime. So traditionally, the bird study group meets September to April, and then May, June, July, and August, there are no meetings because, again, people are afield, everyone's out enjoying nature, so there aren't typically meetings. However, this year we are having a May meeting, and it will be our last one, and we're doing a bit of a community gathering, I'm calling it. It's going to be I'm doing a couple of things. So we're going to hear from George Naylor, who's going to talk about the cliff swallows. So back to that petition I was telling you about. So this is just a citizen doing this work. This is just an average person who is out there monitoring species, watching what municipalities or the province are doing or utilities are doing, and ensuring that birds and their habitats and their safety and their well-being are kept front and center. So this is a great example. We're going to hear from George. Dave Moffat is a Dundas resident and one heck of a guy. He's been doing some marsh wren breeding population surveying, I think mostly as a hobby, on Coots Paradise, and he wants to share some information about that with us. So we'll be hearing two small presentations from those chaps, likely about 20 to 25 minutes with some Q&A. We're also going to present the Bird of the Year Award winner next month, as well as the Robert Curry Award winner next month. So those two things are happening. And then, you know what? I mean, I could probably squeeze in another person. So if you have a topic or something you want to share with everybody, reach out to me, let me know, and we can carve out a little corner for you to share an update, a story, something that you want the people, the masses, to know about. So keep that in mind. But with that, I would like to welcome our speaker tonight. So you may know him, you may not, but Rob Porter is another swell chap. He is the director at large for the Hamilton Naturalists Club, a naturalist, a software engineer based right out of Hamilton. He's the host of his own podcast, which is doing quite well. It's called the Songbirding Podcast, which can be described as interpreted audio tours of songbird territories, which currently has over 85 episodes that last about 20 minutes, making over 30 hours of educational and relaxing soundscapes. Relaxing is a key word there. He's the director at large with the Naturalist Club, collaborates with other members of the club for the Hamilton Bioacoustics Research Project. Honestly, technology has taken us so far. We're learning about what birds are in what sanctuaries just using audio recording devices and listening to them after. And he's going to tell us all about that. So, again, stay comfortable. And let's put our hands together for the one and only Rob Porter. And I'll turn my mic off, Rob. Yeah. I'll turn my camera off, and you can have the floor.
Well, I just want to check with you that you can hear me.
I can hear you.
All right. And I will do the screen share thing and make sure that that works. Can you see that?
Indeed.
And why don't we do just a quick sound check for a sound playback.
Yep. You're good. Someone was saying who a bunch of times. I don't know who that was.
Good. All right. Excellent. Yeah. So thanks for having me on. We're going to have a couple other people that I've asked to join on the panel just to have someone to have a back and forth with at certain points. So we'll be talking to Jackson again, and there's a couple other folks on here as well. So bird listening is the title I've decided to go with on this. Here's just a quick little roadmap of what I'm going to be talking about. Kind of what is this, some benefits, challenges, techniques, equipment I use, and we'll go to the questions after. So why don't we define first, what is birding by ear? Basically, you're identifying species by the vocalizations and other sounds that they create. There are other terms out there too, ear birding and bird listening, but birding by ear is the one I see most commonly in this. So why would you want to learn this? Easily being able to identify species without having the binoculars up and around to your face all the time, to give your eyes a break and close your eyes. You can look at whatever you want to look at. To be able to identify species that can't easily be seen. And what I mean by that is when you're out owling for owls, and when you have species such as, and we'll get to this later, something like the red-eyed vireo that likes to spend a lot of his time in the canopy and not necessarily out visible all the time. And a lot of wrens that like to hide, and birds that are in foliage and things that just aren't great for seeing them. But it's also useful for understanding what is out of place here. If I know a spot really well and I hear a sound I don't normally hear and I don't normally recognize, that might be something rare or it might be something new. And also just to find what you're looking for quickly. You really want to find a blue-winged warbler, and you're going to go listen for that buzzing sound that they make. So who can learn is the next part. And I think this is important to go over, that there is a audio range, like a hearing range you do need to have. Some people do have high frequency hearing loss and other hearing impairments, which make birding by ear either not possible or less tenable. Generally, you're going to need to be able to hear between 200 and 10,000 or so hertz and up. The human hearing goes up to about 20,000, but it decreases over time as you get older. High frequency hearing loss is a very common age-related condition. I pretty sure everyone basically deals with this in their life. Some birders do mention, especially senior ones, that they, can remember the last time they heard cedar waxwing, and then the cedar waxwing was no longer audible because it's very high frequency. So one of the things I'm going to do in this presentation is anything I do playback with, I will have these spectrographs here. They're not super important though, so feel free to, I am sure a lot of people have been looking at screens a lot. You don't necessarily need to watch a lot of this presentation. You could close your eyes or you can see what's going on here. I'll try to refer if I am pointing out something on the screen though. In this case, on the left here, you are seeing what is a spectrogram, also known as a spectrograph, sometimes referred to as a sonogram. There's a lot of terms. It is a representation of frequencies, in this case of audio frequencies. There are other kinds of spectrographs you can do, but this is for audio. This particular audio piece we'll be hearing later is actually, that little on the left there is a Carolina wren, actually. And on the right here, you'll see the reason I put this here is that growing up, I did have a bird guide that had spectrograms in them. And that is the Golden Guides were known for doing this back in the 80s and 90s. And they would publish these, and I thought they were so useful because they kind of give you a shape to look at visually to represent that sound you're hearing. And it's really neat. But if you don't know what it sounds like, it's a bit of a guess, but it can, if you know what you're hearing and you're going to compare the spectrograph, it might make more sense though. So it's a really interesting thing they did there. I'm going to throw this out here right now, that this book, which I actually have here too, really great book that came out a few years ago called the Field Guide to Bird Sounds of Eastern North America. And there's a Western component too, Western companion as well. It is full of pages just like this redneck grebe thing. And the really neat part is at the back of the book, there is this multi-tiered index. So you go through a thing that says, what did you hear? And then there's different categories like a single note, or the same note repeated, or the same phrase repeated, or a complex song. And then it gives you options like with musical warbles, hooting, cooing, growling sounds, buzzing sounds, and then you choose a page number, and it actually takes you through a multi-tier index. So you go to that page number, it gives you options, and then those options give you more page numbers to backtrack through the index into possibly the right page. So it gives you kind of an audio-based index in the back, which is really interesting. And Nathan's done a really good job in making it really accessible in that way. So when we're talking about spectrograms and frequency ranges, we're going to switch over here to my audio player. And I've tried to what's called normalize these sounds, which means the background in some of these is going to be a little loud, like a little like staticky sounding, because some of these sounds are kind of naturally quiet and I have to bring the whole thing up to hear it. So there might be a little bit of a static sound that's probably wind or just general raising of the sound. So if you're hearing that, that's okay. Hopefully it's not too loud for anyone. I did some tests earlier to make sure it was okay. But let's start with an example of one of the lowest sounds we all know of. And that, of course, is great horned owl. This was I believe this was the pair of owls that we found on our bioacoustic recorders at the new Sheila Dunduli Sanctuary in December. And that is a pair of them doing a duet. And of course, that is a fairly low range audio bird. And I know this is hard to read over here, these numbers, but basically this is along the 300 hertz level. And this is what you call a logarithmic scale. So there's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, then 700, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. The very top here is 20,000. So as it goes higher up, it gets much more tighter in the frequencies here. But the low range, you'll notice there's this overtone as well in the great horned owl, and that's something that happens in more sing-songy birds at times. Yeah, it's kind of I think that's called overtone. And yeah, so owl's kind of one of the lowest ones you might expect to hear. Let's go up a little higher. I've got there a mourning dove. I've got this photo because I just thought it was amusing. It's a mourning dove and a vesper sparrow having a conversation, maybe, I don't know. But they sit around the 400 to 500 hertz range. So pretty low here. And then we're going to step up quite a bit higher here now. Let's go into the 3K to 9K, kind of warbling up and down here, you'll see. That's a Canada warbler in this section here, in American redstart in this section here. And so you can see the frequencies going up and down like that there, but it's very bright. And you'll notice this looks, this one sounds, and I'm gonna blow this up a little more lazy. And that's the American redstart. And for those who like a visual reference, there you are. Canada warbler and American redstart. I chose a female photo here because there's not going to be very much female bird song here, so throw one in at least. Yeah, so let's go just one more example of these. Oh, it looks like I have two more examples. So we got it. So this section here, we got a Tennessee warbler, very high. This is almost at 10K. This is, some of you might not be able to hear this, that repeated sound, but most of you should be able to hear this. A Baltimore Oriole. And I just recalled now, I don't have a slide for those two, so I don't have photos for them. One last one though, this is the one I showed at the beginning, a Carolina wren. And yeah, let's go to that, Carolina wren. So birds also do have non-vocal sounds too. So ruffed grouse is a good example. Their drumming of their wing beats, very, very low, very difficult to record actually. I got some recordings last weekend and they're barely audible, even though standing there, I could hear them perfectly fine. It's just microphones aren't great for that low type of stuff. Mourning doves, when they take off, their wings make this this whinnying sound, and that's another kind of thing. And there are other birds that do that as well too, like the woodcock, and then of course woodpeckers, pecking, drilling, drumming, etc. And a lot of owls and other species do have the bill snaps and barks and things like that they'll do as well. Okay, so this is where I'm going to pull in some people from panel because I'd love to just put some questions out there. So I noticed that Tibor and Terry are here. Why don't you say hi?
Hi, guys.
Hey, Tibor.
I'm not too sure if Terry's on.
Okay. There we go.
Good.
And we got Jackson as well, too. Excellent. So why don't we start with you, Tibor? What's your biggest challenge when birding by ear?
Oh, well, I got to say, just remembering them, because it's almost like learning to dance. You learn a few of the simple steps, and unless you practice them, then you forget them. So you just, over time, I seem to be logging some in and then just remembering those, and then other ones go out the other end when you don't hear them.
Yep.
I guess that's about it. One thing I definitely found was useful is if you can actually see the bird calling while it's calling, because somehow that, I don't know, for me, maybe as a visual learner, that just logs in my mind a lot better than listening to the calls on like an app, something like that. That's one thing that I find it a challenge. Unless I can see it and then lock it in memory, I have a hard time keeping it on.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I will get to that actually in a little bit. Terry, how about you?
My challenge is that I have hearing loss in the higher ranges.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And so Tibor hears things that I don't. And he says that they're very loud, but I can hear other things that he says are softer.
Yeah.
But
yep.
Frequency.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And go ahead.
Repetition is important for me. I don't see the birds, if I don't see them often, and I don't have the sounds repeated, I forget them.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jackson, how about you?
I think knowing that there are just so dang many birds out there, and
yes,
you're just trying to kind of cut through, a few to hear the one. Trying to remember, maybe what varieties of calls certain birds have, I guess. So I think just sheer abundance can sometimes, the overwhelming noises can be a bit tough.
Yeah, and to that same point, I think when you have a lot of different birds calling at the same time, it throws you off because you can't hear that pattern, and sometimes you wonder whether one is part of the other one, if they're close enough to each other in voice.
Yep, definitely. I'm gonna get you folks to put mute back on just for a second.
Wait, Rob, what's your biggest challenge?
Oh, I will get to that actually. So here's some common concerns that I've found when birding by ear. So, as has been mentioned already, requiring repeated exposure to the species. Some people do say birding by ear is difficult to learn, definitely. Some people will say it requires you have exceptional hearing, or it's just too much work because I don't bird often enough is another thing. Or maybe my memory's not that great, for example. Or maybe just like Jackson said, there's just too many species that sound the same. And I think Tibor said something like that too. That can sound the same, or maybe there's just too many species around sometimes. That would be another one, I think. So let's pull back the panel again. I'm going to do a little, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Why don't we do it one at a time? We'll start with Tibor. How about you?
Oh no. Okay.
All right. So this is going to be actually non-bird sounds because I'm experimenting with something here. So I want to see, I'm pretty sure you're going to recognize what this is, but we're going to go through a few different sound effects here. So we'll start with this one. Okay. So what do you think that is?
It's a hard one. Okay.
Yep.
It's a car starting up and revving.
Okay. So let's go with another one here.
That's a two-stroke engine. It's probably a chainsaw.
Yep. What do you think?
I think that's either a diesel engine or like a not very well tuned normal engine.
Okay. Maybe Jackson, do you agree with what he was saying?
Yeah, it sounded like a tractor or something, something weirder, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. So this is a point I'm going to come to a bit later too, but these are all engines none of you necessarily sought to learn what an engine sounds like, let alone what different engines sound like. But yet, you seem to know these things somehow. And those are kind of real life examples. Let's go to something a little less real life. Let's start with Jackson this time. What do you think this is?
Is that a noise from Super Mario?
It is, yes. How about this one?
That's when Mario eats a
Yep.
mushroom. Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
How about this one?
Sounds like a lightsaber.
Okay, so another point here is that you know some sounds that you have never encountered in real life, but you have learned through narratives of some kind. So they're obscure. You could probably say the sound that, like, Mario jumping is a fairly, to some extent, obscure sound. There's a lot of sounds that would be a lot like it, but you're able to pick it out. So why are movie, TV, video game sound effects easy to pick up and learn? So you're often introduced, when you do those, you're introduced into a context with a visual, but I think more importantly, a narrative cue. So let's say the Mario Brothers example, you press a button and you get a sound, but you see something on the screen and you know something is happening. It's very specific. It's a jump. Or the Star Wars example, where you see someone pull out this thing called a lightsaber of the first movie, and you haven't heard that sound before, but you do learn it pretty quickly. There are scenes later in those movies where you hear just that sound, but you don't see anything happening, and you know what happened because you've been introduced to it. And it's been repeated a couple times. This is sometimes called sound design, and other kinds of design is the rule of three. You introduce the narrative context, you repeat it at least once more, and then you introduce it on its own without any of the narrative or visual cues or other cues. And the audience just knows what it means. So I'm going to come back to that point a little later about, like, how one might learn bird songs a little more easily. But I'm going to step now to kind of techniques. And so maybe we'll start with Terry. What kind of techniques have you tried to learn bird songs?
For techniques, like this ones that I guess, like, Tibor listens to your podcast, yep. And he tells me, this bird sounds like drink your tea, and that one, I forget the name of it, but I can picture it. It's got black sides and with a white under the wing, I think.
Yes, it is an Eastern towhee. And I'll actually be getting to that one later. So actually, I think one of the most important points of the things you said is that someone kind of told you a story about it.
Yes.
And this is something that in order to make this presentation, I had to do a lot of reflecting on why is it that I've been able to learn so well the last few years. It's not like, I'm not going to go with the whole, like, maybe I have great hearing or maybe I have great memory or anything like that. I think there's something more going on, and just it goes on with naturalists in general as they learn things. But next, let's go to Tibor. What techniques have you tried, or is it kind of, it might be the same, but we'll see.
Yeah, so as Terry mentioned, I listened to your bird songing, Songbirding podcast, and actually I think the thing that was most useful for me there is when you gave the mnemonics for it. Somehow that just stuck in my brain more. And then along the same lines, I watched some YouTube videos of common birds with songs, and that was really useful too, because like I said, just somehow seeing the bird with the song worked out pretty well. And then I guess Terry and I go, like, we live in the country now, and we go for a walk every morning, and then when we hear a song, and I think I know which it is, then I look that up on Merlin or something like that, and I listen to it, and then over time I start getting things more and more right. So that's I guess the main ways that I've taken to it.
Excellent. And Jackson, how about you? What kind of techniques have you tried?
I would try to listen for tones and patterns, I guess. I would try and, like, especially the more I got into it. I've been birding for maybe 15 years, I guess, but I used to start, and I still do, try and think of the patterns at which the call, patterns, length, and then tones can sometimes help narrow down, families or species. So I'll listen for those. But then when I first started, and I'll still do this, I'll use my phone and I'll just open up the voice notes portion of my phone, and I'll just hold it out and record it so I can come home later and listen. Although, and in the Q&A, 2 people have asked this kind of the same question, which talks about apps, which I'll save that for a little later, because now I can open up
that'll
an
definitely
app.
be part of it. Yeah.
Cool. So those are some things I've done.
Yeah, you've actually touched on some stuff that I will be touching upon. Has anybody here found that just listening to something on a loop for a long time has helped learn something?
Yes.
Yeah, I think in your songbirding, like there are oftentimes you stop and you were at a particular location where the bird, and it definitely the more you heard it, and then actually kind of the more different permutations of it actually help too, because a lot of them have got not exactly the same call, but pretty close to the same call over time. So that was useful.
So I'm going to amend my question because I just realized I probably posed it incorrectly. Has anybody used like, the old, the loops you get on something like the All About Birds website, or you download this short clip of something and just put it on a loop over and over and over again? Has anybody found that helpful?
I can't say I've done that particularly. I mean, and I think someone's mentioning this in the chat as well, where it's just if you expose yourself to the same noises and it's the bird, it just kind of becomes locked in. But no, that's a neat angle that you're explaining there.
Yeah, because this might be a little bit older, but I do remember a time when people were using CDs like on a loop over and over again. They put a certain track on a loop, or they would download the sound of a bird song and then put that song on a loop over and over and over again. But they were still having trouble learning it. And so what I mean by repetition in this is I guess more of just a small clip repetition kind of thing. But it looks like nobody here has had that, and that's one of those things that I wasn't sure if somebody would have or not. So this is a bit of an experiment. So my next one is, my opinion is you don't need just a repetition, but you do need some kind of a narrative. For example, I did a music degree a long time ago, and in our first year in music class, the way we would have to memorize pieces of music to be able to answer like an exam was to take a CD and just listening to all that music on a loop over and over and over again, basically trying to pair what is the name of the piece with with the actual recording, so that any clip that was played, I could identify it right away. But it very rarely worked. It only worked on the pieces that which I had a good story for of some kind. Like I was there for the lecture about that particular one, and there was something interesting about it. That kind of thing. So I'm going to make somewhat of an argument there that you need something to kind of write that in your brain. Now, eventually those stories can go away and it's just there. For example, for me, something like a bobolink or an eastern meadowlark, I grew up on a farm. Those were in the background all the time. Red-winged blackbird as well. I don't need like to have some kind of like, oh, this is that time I encountered this bird and was doing this, and that reminds me of that, because it was a long time ago and I've encountered a lot more since then. But to initially pick it up, I think there is a bit more necessary. So I'm just going to step through a few bird species and maybe talk a little bit about them and some different things that I've encountered with them that have helped. And I'm hoping through these kinds of stories, this kind of helps other people just think of some things. So the rusty blackbird here, and this is one of those birds that it doesn't come through here much. Like it is, we're lucky if we get those few that stick in the winter sometimes, but you're not going to get songs very often in the winter. And when they're coming through, it's going to be April, May coming through, and they'll sing, and then they'll come back later in the year, September, October, I think it is, but they're not going to be singing much. And let me just play what that sounds like. Now, the specific, and I realize now I have a longer file than I thought I had here. The specific sound we're looking for is this one here. And that is, to me, something that sounds like a rusty drawbridge or something, which rusty blackbird, rusty gate, rusty something. It's kind of an interesting coincidence that they have that. But you also notice that when, let me go back here for a second, when you see the red-winged blackbird thing here, you notice it's a cross-cutting across many frequencies, but this rusty is very focused. And so a little interesting note on the rusty blackbird is that I've encountered flocks a few times, and there is a consistency about finding them. That is that you need probably a flooded area, forest, more likely, like lots of trees and things. But in order to actually hear them sing, and when they come up to sing, it's when they're not feeding. And when they are down feeding, they're going to be quiet. So I was part of the Rusty Blackbird Blitz a few years ago, and really spent my time. I took time to figure out how to find these birds. And one of the things I did was when I found a place that they were supposedly at, I ended up actually waiting around longer than I would have. I usually would just keep walking if I didn't hear them. So I hung around a spot that I thought I heard them at. And the I estimated every 25, 30 minutes, they would come up. They would start singing for a few minutes, and then they'd die down, go back. And I wouldn't see them anymore. And anybody walking by wouldn't have known these rusty blackbirds were there because they're down kind of in the swamp floor, not visible, just feeding, being very quiet. And then every 25, 30 minutes, they'd just come up and start singing as a group. So that was one thing I encountered there. Oops. So Terry mentioned the Eastern towhee. This one's kind of a neat one for if you want to talk about like variations and things. This is one of those ones where the mnemonics really work. The drink your tea one. So let's do this. So that's the drink your tea. It works very nicely for this species. And it's actually got multiple, it's got variations on it. And I'd like to throw this just out there. So that was one encountered in Bruce Peninsula that had a bit of a variation on it. Birdsong can have variation. So if you hear something similar to drink your tea, it probably is the Eastern towhee. It's just putting a little variation into it. You'll notice this one's putting more reverb into its second half here. So one of the things as well is notice how much time there is between each call too. That can also be a hint to your species at times, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Here's one more, and this is the, I'm going to zoom into a, oh, no, we're good here. This is the call of the towhee. This one's kind of an interesting story because I think the name towhee is really named after this, although many people will say it sounds like shawink. It can also sound like towhee at the same time. So that's the Eastern towhee. And that is one example of mnemonics working pretty good. So let's go to something that's a bit more, for me, something that took repetition to learn in a kind of different kind of way, the black-throated green warbler. And for those of you who have been on the Bruce Peninsula, you would know that this is just a background sound everywhere in the summer. So one of the mnemonics used for this at times is trees, trees, lovely trees, and that works. This is a bird that has at least 2 songs. It has that, and then it has this. Oops, no, I got the wrong one. No, maybe I didn't have my thing queued up correctly. So let me see. I'm just going to skip on to the next thing, but for now, I'm just going to say that sound is very common in the background in Brisbane Scylla all the time. It is one of those things where if you go hiking, you're just going to hear that all the time. And eventually it got to the point where for me, anytime I hear that down here during migration, I'm just immediately reminded of one of the trails up north around Tobermory or Lion's Head. It's just remembering being there so many times, hearing that sound. That's how I ended up learning it, by that kind of like narrative repetition of like every time I went hiking there, I heard this bird. So I'm going to go to a relative of it. This is the black-throated blue warbler. And let's take a look at this bird. This black-throated blue warbler male shown here is the very one I recorded actually right here at the Lindsay Tract Trails. This is in Bruce Peninsula again. So one of the things I like to say about this is it has a very similar voice to the black-throated green warbler. You could imagine the black-throated blue warbler singing the black-throated green warbler song, I think. And that's one way to relate them. The other is this one also has a mnemonic, beer, beer, bees. And further down into Allen Park, which is kind of Grey County, I encountered this one recently. You know, just it's adding another little note on the end to it there. But again, it's essentially beer, beer, bees. That same voice, just a slight variation on it. So don't worry about if you hear something close and it's just off slightly. This is one of those cases where birds do innovate at times. So we go next to the species here, Eastern woodpui. These are really interesting because they are another bird. Actually, when I step back a second to just reiterate, the black-throated blue warbler is not as incessant as the black-throated green warbler. Black-throated green warbler is kind of a background sound in a lot of places where it's just singing all day, all the time. Whereas black-throated blue is very situational. They'll sing for a bit, rest for a while, and come up and sing for a bit again later. They are not as incessant. Eastern woodpui, though, yes, all the time. They are singing quite frequently. You can imagine saying POE for this one. And it has this, basically 2 forms. This, where it goes down, where it goes up. And interesting note that these actually in the early morning will actually tie these together and make a continuous sound for the around dawn. It's kind of interesting. They basically tie them together. But this was recorded at McMaster Forest. So you can hear the Ancaster Creek there in the background. But these birds, I just think are neat because they're another one of those background birds. And it always reminds me of late evening because they keep singing past sunset for a bit and they begin singing before sunrise. So it's definitely a sound that you hear through the night in the peak of the season. So it always reminds me of that late night kind of that sound there. I'm going to go in with a couple more birds here. I'm going to go into winter wren. This one's just interesting because anytime you hear any bird with a really long song like this, is just really fascinating. What I like about this song is that there's not much comparable to it. If you learn that song, you've learned the winter wren song, there's not much to compare with. It is, it's just lengthy. It's high pitched. You'll notice it's much higher up in the thing there. It has a lot of variation. So there's little parts where things repeat, or there's innovations and little improvisations. And it goes higher over time also. So that highest part, some people might not be able to hear, but it's really neat. But now I'm going to get to, what about if you want to learn birds and you hear something similar? And sometimes this helps where, let's say we want to learn the brown creeper. To me, the brown creeper sounds like an abbreviated version of the winter wren. It's up there and the high pitched, it's a little flighty. This is actually 2 instances of the song. Again, apologies to those that this might be too high pitched for. But it has that same airy quality of it to it. So I treat those as things that, you can sometimes go, a bird sounds like this, then it sounds like that. Okay. Feel like I have my things out of order here. Oh, I found my other black-throated green warbler. Let's go back to that for a second. Black-throated green warbler, because it looks like I have some things out of order here. Let's remind ourselves what that had sounded like. Trees, trees, lovely trees. But it also has a second song. Dee-dee-dee-doo-dee. I don't know if there's a mnemonic for it. But those 2 songs are the same species. There's actually a third one I've heard too, and I've recorded, but I didn't have time to really include that in here. And it was pretty uncommon, but yeah, those 2 are the common songs for them. Basically, part of the reason I have it in here is because it is one of those birds that has multiple songs, and they're multiple consistent songs. It's not just they're improvising all the time. Let's see here. How about we bring Jackson on here? I just want to maybe pick your brain or something. We'll do something interactive here.
Great.
You know the species?
It's a vireo. Is it a red-eyed vireo?
Yep. It is. So let's get down to red-eyed vireo. So did you know? So here's an interesting thing. So this is one in a nest. This was taken in Hamilton. They hang their nests. You'll notice here that there's the branch line. The nest is underneath the branch. It's actually in the V of a branch. So there's a way to memorize how the nests work. They put it in the crotch of the branch, but it looks like a V where they put the nest. They use webs to tie it to the branch. But they also always include a piece of wasp nest. Very brave. And they'll even go a mile away to find that piece of wasp nest. And the running theory is that it helps keep blue jays away. It's just basically decoration. It's not structural at all. But a blue jay sees a piece of wasp nest, and I'm not going to go near you there.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that was something that was discovered by, I believe it was Bernd Heinrich, which I'll mention him. He's got some books and stuff that I'll mention later. But let's take this next song I have here. Do you know that one at all?
Can you play it again?
Yeah. So I'll give you a bit of a clue. Let's go back to the red-eyed vireo. Sounds like it's saying vireo over and over again to me. That's just my ears. I also think red-eyed vireo, by the way, sounds like it's asking a question all the time. Let's go to this other one.
Yeah, Mallory, who is in this call tonight, was teaching me about red-eyed vireo, and it always comes from the tippy top of the canopy, typically.
Yeah.
And I think she was saying it's like up high, treetop, over here, like kind of just a real quick, like.
That's another way. Yeah. There's a lot of different mnemonics and things you can use for this. And let's try this one.
I don't know. It sounds like it could be another vireo, but
yeah. So it's very close to the red-eyed vireo, but you'll notice that there's a lot more gap in between the singing. Yeah. It's also, to my ears, sweeter. Would you agree with that?
It also seems like there's a lot of variation in the call where it's not kind of repetitive the way the red-eyed vireo was, where you can kind of hear a matching thing, or it sounds it's not like like it seemed like it was kind of going a little more sporadic.
So this one, we got a blue-headed vireo. So we're close. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I find a lot of these vireos are pretty similar. It's like, if you know the red-eyed vireo really well and get to know it really, really well, you can kind of recognize the same song in the blue-headed vireo a little bit. And to me, I'm always thinking, well, it sounds like that, a little less frequent, a little more variation, but more importantly, a lot sweeter sounding, less harsh sounding, a little more softer. And you've got that. Let's pull out one more here.
Try not to look at your codes.
I know.
I'm also getting hot.
Let's try this one.
Under the gun here.
We're going for the lower one here. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, it's probably like a Philadelphia vireo or something I'm not used to. Anyways, it's definitely.
Yeah.
Is that it?
No, you're close though. So this one is native to here for breeding. That'll give you another hint. So it's the yellow-throated.
Oh.
So here's a way to remember this one. Does that sound like a vireo with a sore throat to you?
Well, see, I think with this one, I would think about the pattern again.
Yeah, okay. So for me, it's got that vireo, like it's saying vireo.
Yep.
But it's doing it in a very harsh way. And maybe I'll throw another example of how harsh I mean. Let's pull out the one of our harsher birds. Do you know that one?
I mean, it sounds like an American robin.
Yeah, that's close. It is. That's a scarlet tanager, which you might know that people say they sound like robins with a sore throat.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say the same thing with the yellow-throated vireo. It sounds like a vireo with a sore throat. But since its name is the yellow-throated vireo, why not, sore-throated vireo would be a way to memorize that.
I like that.
But at the same time, it's also the less common one too around here. So for me, it's kind of like, I don't hear this very often. Pretty uncommon to hear this. You're going to find it in the South Shore of Coots sometimes, Halton forests, maybe places like Spooky Hollow, but you're not going to find it in every single forest you're in, like the red-eyed vireo. And you're certainly not going to find the blue-headed very much down here in the breeding time. You have to go further north or go into parts of Beverly Swamp, things like that, to get those breeding.
You have a question from Glenn. Yeah. Does the blue-headed vireo end its pattern with a drop-off?
That's a good question.
Comment about that.
Let's go to the blue.
Also, Sarah Riche is just flexing her blue-headed vireo in the chat as well. Good for you, Sarah. Thanks for rubbing it in.
You'll notice that there's actually, if you look at the spectrograph, there is a bit of a lift off at the end, right here. This one goes level. So it kind of, it dips down. It's just kind of like the way you say vireo. I don't know. Depends on who you are and how you say things. But I often have this thing where I say it always has questions. It never has answers when it comes to the vireo is another thing you can remember by. But the other thing that I have sometimes caught myself doing is misidentifying yellow-throated vireo as scarlet tanager if I'm just not paying attention enough. I just hear it in the background. I'm like, oh yeah, scarlet tanager. But no, scarlet tanager is never going to be that short. So yeah, let's take a look at those birds, by the way. Yellow-throated vireo. By the way, yeah, they breed at times along the south shore of Coots, into Halton Forest, places like that, but they're one of our most uncommon breeding vireos around here. And scarlet tanager, of course, way more common than them, and have that sore-throated robin sound to them. A lot of people do like to call them the sore-throated robin. Yeah, let's throw one more at you just for fun. This one's my last sound thing, so this one's just going to be kind of a little wacky, but let's go with it. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if you're doing vireos, you haven't talked about the warbling vireo yet, although that seems like it's farther spaced out than a warbling vireo, which is much more like steady, I want to say.
Yep.
But I don't know if you're throwing a wacky one out at me.
All right. The part that is wacky about it is stuff like this. And stuff like this. So this is actually a red-eyed vireo, believe it or not. And this is a recording I made last year at McMaster Forest when I came across one that was singing the Eastern Woodpewee song. It was throwing in these things that were kind of mimicry of an Eastern Woodpewee, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And actually, I had to look this up, and it's actually documented that red-eyed vireos do at times do mimicry, very minor amounts and in their own voice, as it is, but it happens. So there's another little weird fact, weird story for you. It must be incredibly rare because that's the only time I can recall coming across it. But another bird that does it that you might not expect is the gnatcatcher. Blue-gray gnatcatcher also does mimicry, but it does it in its own high-pitched, squealy voice, so it would never fool anybody. You would just think, hey, why is there a really wispy-sounding crow or whatever? You know, that you'd never think that because it would be too quiet and tiny of a sound. So they do that as well, and I think that's kind of fascinating. So I'm going to go ahead.
Rob, I just want to say that it's 8:38.
Yes.
So that's a little time countdown for you. That we usually end around 9 with some Q&A. But so I'm going to just say that if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A function now. That way we can kind of see what's coming up rather than waiting for the end to plug them all in, or put them in the chat, either or. And we'll keep going. All right, back over to you, Rob.
Awesome. And yeah, so that was the last of my little soundscape stuff. I hope that you learned a little bit about spectrographs there. I think it just showing by example. If you want a program that will show them, you can download something called Audacity that will do it as well. That's free for all operating systems. So for those curious about that. But now I'd want to get into like some example techniques for learning birdsong. Some of these will work for some of you, not for others. And so for some of you, all these might work. Who knows? It really depends on what's good with how you like to learn, what you have access to do, what you enjoy doing. So here's one technique. So build deep knowledge of a patch. So choose somewhere or a couple locations, depending on the time you have, and just focus on them all year round. Get to know them. So the reason I say something like this is for me, for example, when I first started hiking a lot at McMaster Forest because that was near where I lived back in 2013, 2014, 2015. And I just got to document everything that was there. Over time, I really found that I began to really deeply know species calls and songs, especially the common ones. I can't emphasize enough that learning common bird songs is really, really useful. And I mean, like, you don't have to go learn all the warblers because they're rare and they're going to be coming through at one point and then forget them for the next year. You can acquire a lot of deep knowledge about cardinals throughout the year, for example, and you'll really know when there's a cardinal there. And same with woodpeckers and stuff like that. You have that chance all year round. And the payoff is in a few, we'll say, years, you will know in that space, even maybe even after a year, you will know when something new shows up in that space and something you haven't heard before, something you don't recognize. I did put a little note in here. Also make sure that you know what is a squirrel, what is a frog, what is a chipmunk as well too, because they can make sounds that people mistake for birds sometimes. But yeah, as you get to that deep knowledge, you'll get to know when something new has happened. And that is one way of learning birds by ear, is that maybe you spent a lot of time photographing and you've gotten used to this. Every time I photograph a hairy woodpecker, I hear this piercing sound. Or every time I see a downy woodpecker, I hear that da-da-da-da-da-da-da call. It's all up to you how you go about it, whether you're into photography, recording, just journaling, just listing, anything like that. But just getting to know what a place sounds like and what who the citizens are there in terms of birds. So another one is, like I mentioned there earlier, was recording bird songs yourself. Could be a phone, could be a recorder, like a old school voice recorder, could work, or a field recorder if you have one available. So one technique here is record what you don't recognize, look it up later. Another technique is record what you think you recognize and annotate it. Make yourself a little note. I think it's this. Look it up later. You can make clips of them, upload to My Naturalist if you're not sure of the ID. People will help there generally, or other online resources like the Hamilton Beginning Birds list, things like that. You can upload stuff there and people will help you. Getting to know via spectrogram can also help as well, like I've shown before. It can be an interesting learning tool for you visual learners. And I'm going to say it's not for everyone, but certainly recording a podcast about bird songs it's guaranteed to make you better at it. So another technique, and this has been mentioned before, doing quizzing. So quiz yourself or work with others. There's several online quizzes like eBird's Photo and Sound Quiz, Cornell's Birdsong Hero, Dendroica, Larkwire. iBird has bird identification, has bird songs in it, as does Merlin, and you can have maybe a friend quiz you based on the sounds in there. You can upload your stuff to Xenocanto. You can browse through there for lots of examples of different songs. You can make your own soundscapes with a recorder and keep them for the winter, for when you want to keep that blue-winged warbler in your mind, or that yellow warbler or chestnut-sided warbler, and go listen to it in December and then listen to it in January, and it just won't fade as easily. Another technique is, just going one bird at a time. Get used to focusing on one bird, get to know it really well, get to know one species really well in a lot of places, or one individual bird really well through deeply documenting or journaling. One book I always point people at is this one called One Wild Bird at a Time, which is really neat about this. You can also catch an audiobook version of this, by the way, on Audible. It's a great book, also by Bernd Heinrich, who I mentioned earlier. Techniques I've used in making the podcast, just as a quick note in there, is that when I make different episodes, I actually use different music and everything, so that there's a different context all the time. There's an introduction that tends to focus usually on one species, and then that species appears sometime in the episode, and then it's there at the end without any mention of what it is. Again, I'm using that rule of three in narrative, the narrative rule of three for audio design for movies, TV shows, etc. Same kind of thing. I tend to avoid overwhelming soundscapes, the ones where you're just have the 10 million species all at once in the middle of migration. I try to avoid that. It's a little overwhelming. I will try to not edit between instances of bird song, so you get a sense of how often a bird vocalizes. Although sometimes I do cut it back just for nobody wants to listen to 2 minutes of silence type of thing. But if it's 10, 15 seconds, sometimes I will leave it like that. And I try not to gloss over any common species, no, just a robin type stuff. So a quick note on equipment in the field, in person, you can have a smartphone, you can throw a high gain mic on a smartphone. These are things you can look up in Google, what kind of high gain mics you can get for your smartphone, or you get an entry level field recorder like the Zoom H1N, which is what I started with, or I've got a kind of a more premium level one with the Zoom H6 with an XY mic. But no matter what mic you get, just make sure you get a fuzzy windscreen, because wind is high gain mics are very sensitive to wind noise. But if it's truly windy, you're not going to have a lot of song generally, but you'll be surprised how easily just a slight breeze gets picked up on a high gain mic. And I'm going to do just a tiny little demo. This is a very quick one. There's a site called BirdNet, and you can Google this. It's also an app. And you can upload recordings, and this machine learning algorithm will try to tell you what it is. Like this Carolina wren and this eastern kingbird. And then there's automated. This is something the Naturalist Club's bioacoustics group works with, the Swift and the Audio Month. I'm not going to get into depth because of time. But here's some photos of our audio moths out in the field, and our swifts out in the field at Hazeland Swamp here, for example. Doug Welch has done some excellent diagrams showing vocalization patterns at McMaster Forest using a longitudinal study. We had a swift unit there recording all year, 24/7. And you'll notice there's a pattern with blue-winged warbler vocalizations late in May, early in June in the morning, and then they get pretty quiet, even though they're still there, but always at sunrise. And you'll notice on the right here, American woodcock, always at nighttime. And that at dusk, there is a window of time, and then there's a pause for a while, and then they come back up again. We thought that was really neat. So, and we're always looking for help with it. Technical and non-technical help. There's someone could help look through our huge database of soundscapes for good ones for a podcast release, because we have the soundscapes or songscapes podcast, which is just sounds, no narrations, no anything, just out of our recorded units. We're always interested in people who have new ideas, novel uses for devices. You can email me on that. Also, donations are always welcome to the club for this kind of stuff. We've been using the research budget for a while now, and we've had partnerships with these organizations, the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy, McMaster University, the RBG, have all led us onto their properties. And of course, we've been on the Hamilton Naturalists Club properties as well. So we're going to move on to questions now. Jackson, would you like to let me know what there is?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for taking us through that that presentation and in your brain, because you know it takes someone wanting to do this, having the know-how to do it, doing it, presenting it, and then presenting it again to all of us. Because like Krista in the chat says, I really like your podcast. It has helped me. Thank you. I know several people who very much listen to your Songbirding podcast. And someone even said, like, I listen to it every night to help calm me down. So there's a testimonial for you. So yeah, like thank you for taking this on. And you know, the bioacoustics, I think we could probably spend a whole, like maybe in our 2021-22 year, we do a whole night on just bioacoustics.
And the lovely thing about bioacoustics is not just birds. We get coyotes very regularly. There are amphibians, obviously frogs, stuff like that. There are things that I have been able to identify because they're mammals, and there's not very many mammal recordings to go by, you know, and I just we just don't have the experts to look into that kind of stuff sometimes. And bats, we haven't had anyone look at our bat recordings to look for bats yet either. That's another possibility.
I can hear two people right now in in the chat right now being like, wait a minute, I think I want to do something. But yeah, untapped app opportunity, mammal sounds. You're right, Sarah. You're one of those people I was thinking would nerd out to this. So if you are somebody who thinks that they could lend some time to help, then Rob at inpictures.ca would be great to reach out to Rob for more. So there's a couple questions. Gerton wants to know, what kind of recording device do you use for recording birds? So maybe you can get into like a specific mic.
Yeah. So I had it on this
You
one here.
mentioned
So
it.
this Zoom 6, H6, but really the Zoom, when you get the Zoom mics that are the H5 or H6, they're part of the system where there's a detachable mic that they have that can be put on any other Zoom mic that has that detachment. So I actually have one called the F1, which is this fairly tiny little thing that's it's used both for lav mics for like actors and stuff like that, as well as field mics. They're really small and portable, so you can use that with what's called an XY mic. So the Zoom H6, when you buy it, it comes with this detachable XY mic, and the XY is interesting because basically when I got the Zoom H1N and actually started using it for stereo, because it has an XY mic as well, that really changed things a lot in terms of audio quality, because now anytime there was some kind of static like sound, like wind or water or just walking, now it had more context, it had more depth. I'm one of those people, actually, I have this kind of, I forget what it's called, like a dysphoria of sorts. Like if I hear a monotone sound of wind, it actually gives me a headache over time. So my own podcast was giving me headaches. trying to edit them and stuff like that. It doesn't happen for many other people. It does happen for me. And so I really wanted to get rid of that factor eventually. I had a lot of people saying, oh, I love when you're walking, and I hear that walking sound. I'm like, oh, I've gone through many a migraine because of that. But it doesn't happen for me with this XY mic, which actually has a particular pattern which it does stereo, and it actually looks like that. That's why it's called an XY mic. There's a mic pointing this way and one pointing that way. Yeah, I'm using that. It doesn't mean that that's the best one out there. It's just the one I end up choosing and going into because I don't have the money to try out lots of different ones. But I figured once I was into the Zoom mics, I was into the Zoom mics, but there are probably other brands and stuff you could use. Yeah, that's what I'm using at the moment.
I also find, I know that if I'm recording video of a bird, through a spotting scope or something, and I'm listening, I can hear myself breathing a lot through it too. I can hear, it's like, Jesus, such a mouth breather.
Yeah, the thing I had to learn early on when doing these recordings. So for years I was recording without doing a podcast, and I was doing the typical recordist thing because I did learn this kind of stuff when I was doing theater and film as a degree way back in the day. I was doing film work sometimes where I was doing the boom mic and doing the recording, all that. And I learned all this thing that as a recordist, you got to keep yourself out of it completely and utterly. So you try to be, as a recordist, as quiet as possible, especially when you're dealing with high gain microphones, because any little move you make, or you just bump the mic, it's audible. That's why it took me so long to think of the idea of even narrating over anything, because it was kind of like, that's like the antithesis of being a recordist. You do not include yourself within it. And I learned pretty quickly, though, that I had to be fairly quiet, though, because bird song really requires that depth of sound that is both quiet and loud, whereas dialogue and talk tends to be tuned upwards to as loud as possible. It's kind of like the difference between what you would hear on talk radio, where everyone has their voices tuned to kind of that radio voice, versus a classical radio station where you have everything's varying from quiet to loud. You could also say the same for pop music versus classical. You have softs and louds in classical. You do not have that in pop music. You have kind of one level all times usually. So I had to be very careful with that, because birds are on that classical music range. They're loud and quiet. They're in different frequencies. They're all over the map. So me talking, I have to be quiet when talking. Otherwise, it just overwhelms everything.
Someone has suggested that you people are very appreciative in the chat if you haven't looked at it yet.
Oh, I haven't yet.
But you have an excellent calm voice to listen to. Keep your job. As someone who isn't named, this just says owner. Somebody, Mary Ellen, says, thank you, Rob, for presentation and tips for learning birdsong. Doug Welsh says, smartphone mics are plenty capable.
Yep.
Someone with just a number says, in this digital age, there are so many resources on birdsong. We use the Peterson CD in the car on the way to a birding spot, and we still do.
Yep.
Great presentation, Rob. So that's great. And that kind of led me to a question I have, which we're getting down to the last couple minutes here, but what are your thoughts about people playing bird sounds in nature?
Controversy.
What's the process behind playing a bird sound while you're out in the field?
Yeah, so I don't do it very often. Usually it's more of, I kind of classify it in various ranges. There are things we've learned in the bioacoustic project, by the way, that are very fascinating that have to do with this, believe it or not. And that is that eastern screech owls will react to a siren. Eastern screech owls will react to a coyote. Birds and various species react to each other, not just people who are making sounds and stuff. So there's already the disruption there to some extent. Now, that stated, I do think it's kind of counterproductive to, go playing birdsong everywhere and trying to flush birds out that way all the time. I personally, I've only really, I'll basically say that I only limit it to times when I really need to confirm a species for a survey or something truly rare that I want to know if I'm right or not, or in an educational context of, hey, I'm leading a hike with 20 people and it would help them all if this one species came up. If we can then have that talk about how playback can affect species who are breeding in a territory, we can have that discussion and you can educate those 20 people and get them to see the bird and see, rather than them 20 individually all doing that to 20 different birds, we have this one bird that we affect this one time kind of thing. But that stated, that's kind of what's in my head, but with reality, I haven't had to do it in a long time. That's because generally with all birds, patience pays off. You wait long enough and they'll come out. I'm going to say, I'm mixed in that way. And it obviously I wouldn't be kind of for the more let's just, I've seen people try to attach a speaker thing to a tree and then get their camera out and spend several hours getting the same bird coming back and forth. That's a little excessive. But confirming a species or just learning about it in a small limited context, not as bad, especially if you got a group of people who are all going to enjoy that.
Cool. I wasn't sure. I also wasn't sure if that would disrupt any of the science behind what you're doing with capturing bird sound in the field as well. But that's for another time. It's interesting that you mentioned that about ambulances and screech owls. I remember hearing one, and there's probably a few people here who were with me back in the fall, where we could hear a siren way off in the distance and then a screech owl right behind it, and I never thought to pair those two together. So you just kind of opened up something cool there.
Yeah. You'd be surprised at how even we had this one instance in the Hazeland Swamp, which is, pretty far away from everything, where I do believe we had a recording where coyotes sang and then screech owls followed up. And then I believe a barred owl followed up with that too or something. But it's interesting how things just play off each other.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's plan to do a bioacoustics talk. Maybe you'll be the first one. Maybe you'll be September, and you can tell us all about what you've uncovered this year, because that's kind of leading to my last question to you is, what are you looking forward to? Maybe not so much with this project particularly, but just about spring migration or birding in 2021, something that's positive, perhaps, that we can end on a high note. What's something that Rob Porter is jazzed about right now?
Sounds a good question. Well, I'm hoping to get out of the region at some point. That'd be one thing. It's nice. There's a lot of great spots for birding here, and for recording, it can be decent. There are times when it can be frustrating because just the amount of background noise you probably heard in some of those recordings. How you could probably tell from those recordings which ones were in Hamilton and which ones were further afield. I've had my personal frustrations with planes always flying over me when I try to go somewhere quiet like Flamborough. But personally, this year I'm trying to focus more on things like flocks. I don't have great recordings of large flocks is one thing. So finding a big flock of red-winged blackbirds, what does that sound like when you're amongst that? Getting a nice recording of, actually I got a decent recording of snow buntings this past winter for that. And a bit more at the migration, like find some migration hotspots, maybe once again to 50 Point, because that was a really great spot last year for recordings. I could really get a solid amount of sound out of that. Trying to think of what else in there. I know in terms of like the bioacoustic project, we're really looking forward to just getting out to more sites with more recorders. Last year was kind of a bit of a little bit of a wash due to COVID. We just weren't sure what to do. And the breeding season just snuck up, and I'm sitting here with a whole bunch of devices and not sure how to train anyone to use them. And so I'm placing them all over the place, but I don't have a lot of time myself for retrieving and switching batteries and all the things involved with that. So hoping we can ramp that up a little more and discover what's happening at the Sheila Dunduli Sanctuary, for example, and Hazeland, because both those places we were doing the same thing we did at McMaster last year, and just leaving devices there all year round with just recording constantly to see what we get, if we can get those same kind of graphs that Doug did last time.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about songbirding? What's exciting you about that right now? Because one of the last times you and I spoke in person, you were commenting on how you were like the number 3 nature podcast on Apple Podcasts or
nuts.
something.
Yeah, it's growing really well, and I don't pay too much close to the attention to the numbers right now because they're high enough that I'm not concerned in any way that it's not doing well or anything. It's one of those things where it's really weird because for me, I'm constantly used to trying to get feedback and trying to improve things, but it's hard to do that with a format like that. If it just seems to work for people all the time, then I guess I'm doing all right. And I guess I'll know if I make a change that's wrong at some point. But most of the time in that ends up being the editing and stuff like that. I actually have far more recordings than I could ever put out there. But the ones that I have for the coming year are pretty much done up until I have enough to release. I release bi-weekly, and they're going to be going out until October, and that's when I'll run out of stuff and I'll have to do more editing.
All the more reason to get out in the field during migration.
Yeah, exactly. So
cool.
I'm looking forward to getting into migration and just getting new spaces. Going back to spaces like in the first season of the podcast was Bruce Peninsula, and that was with my older setup of a smartphone plus a high gain mic. And so that's not the highest quality type of thing because it is, while it's high gain, so you get good sound, it is also mono. So you didn't have that surround sound kind of feeling, and it was also because it was based on a smartphone app that didn't do just straight wave files. It was compressed, so there's a difference to the sound for that. So getting into a space like that again with a really good recorder, I'm looking forward to. Last year I was up there briefly with a good recorder, but it was before I knew how to use the better recorder. So word of advice for anyone who gets a much better recorder, it's going to take some time learning how to use it, because it's not just going to make your recordings better. You're going to have new problems and they're going to be amplified. So it took a while.
Good to know.
And you won't know unless you review them soon enough, because I got a lot of garbage recordings from last year. There's just lots of sounds of it just being carried around. I didn't realize carrying it, I was making sounds just by carrying it, the way I was carrying it. So stuff like that, I had to really pay attention and review.
Interesting. I guess, that's part of that learning curve when you do get any sort of new bit of tech. But that's great to know. So for anyone out there looking to get into this or venture into it a little bit more, you know that Rob is your guy to go to. You're getting lots of great positive feedback in the chat function. So maybe, Chris, don't shut the chat down yet when everyone winds down here, so Rob can have a chance to scroll through and read some of it, because you're getting high praise from quite a few people. And Colleen wants to know, Virginia Rail at Kerncliffe answers to pishing. Is that weird? And that's the last question of the night.
I think pishing's fine. It's, you know, with all things, moderation. I mean, it's a pretty common technique to use in the winter as well, too, when you're trying to, like, one of the fun things I love with Christmas bird counts, and I didn't get to do this year, where, you know, get to go to all kinds of Christmas bird counts. No, I got to go to the Hamilton one, Peachtree, and that was it. So I didn't get to go to my usual Walkerton, Tobermory, and all those kinds of counts. When you're doing one in a place like Tobermory, you're searching just for birds at all. It's a different beast than Hamilton, and things like pishing are just necessary to find any birds if you're going to find them, because they're going to bring the chickadees, and chickadees will reveal what else is out there. So yeah, certainly, you know, I'm sure with anything you can go overboard, but yeah, it's
cool. I didn't know that Rail will respond to pishing, and so that's good to know. Cool.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I haven't personally done that because I hadn't thought of that, but maybe.
All right. Well, again, more praise coming in through the chat function. Someone's letting you know that you can go to the University of Toronto and Mississauga to listen for red-winged blackbirds, because they're always there. But with that, and on behalf of the Hamilton Naturalists Club and everybody here tonight or watching this presentation, Rob, thank you so much for letting us into your songbirding, soundscape, audioscape world. I learned some stuff. I know people here learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing what more you do. You're one of the hardest working people I know in the birding world, and I'm so grateful for your tenacity. So, so thanks for everything. Thanks for joining us, and yeah, we will chat again soon. Any last messages?
Oh, for me. Oh,
from you.
On me.
Closing notes.
There's. Let me look up something quickly, because there's a thing I'm doing in a few days, and I guess I didn't promote it, with the High Park Nature Center. There we go, May 2nd, High Park Nature Center. Myself and Andreas from the Birds Canada, we're doing a dawn chorus presentation. It's if you go to highparknaturecenter.com/special events. We're going to be doing this thing on May 2nd, where they're basically asking people to go out during dawn and record or note or whatever, just experience the dawn chorus. And if you'd like, you can record something and post to the social media. If you're not sure what it is, myself or Andreas will be available to tell you what bird you have. And we're going to do a special presentation, a streaming of a soundscape that I had recorded earlier that week, yet to come. It'll probably be done in Coots somewhere during dawn song. And we're going to do a little bit of a thing where basically you stream it in high quality, and we'll use the chat function like there is here in Zoom to kind of comment and throw up links about the different species. And then after that, just do a little interview type thing.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
So more from Rob on May 2nd. Maybe we'll find a way to share that on the Naturalist Club Facebook page so more people could hear about that, or share link to us, and we'll reshare it, or however that works.
Let's see if I can post the link in here. Oh,
yeah, there it is.
Link to Twitter, which then probably links to the actual proper thing, hopefully. Yes, it does. Okay. Dawn chorus.
All right, Rob. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe out there. If you are going outside, protect yourself and protect others. Enjoy migration, and we will see you on May 17th for our last bird study group meeting of the year. Be well. Adios.